if there is a God, will he show himself? And then came the miracle, the great central experience of my whole life. The room instantly lit up in a blinding glare of white light. I was seized by an ecstasy such as I had never known. It seemed to me that I then stood on a mountaintop where a great clean wind was blowing. I thought to myself, but this is not air, this is spirit. This is the God of the preacher.
There was a hospital established in the 20th century called the Charlestown's Hospital, and it was known as something called the belladonna treatment for alcoholism. And what happened, there was some mysterious man who approached this person, Charles Towns, who was not a doctor, by the way, and approached him with a mysterious recipe of drugs, that natural drug that be given to people to cure addictions. And they said they would be certain to make a lot of money. This mysterious person came, gave the instructions, and left without any trace. And it's very interesting because when this was tried, it was first tried on criminals, underworld figures, criminals who were overwhelmed with opium and other kind of addictions, cocaine. And then the federal government approved it to be used on millions of people in China, who obviously had a lot of opium addicts. So it was used en masse on large parts of the population. This same gentleman, even though he wasn't a medical doctor, assisted in developing the early national drug laws that our country is still under. Now, what makes it really interesting is when you know what the belladonna cure comprises. This particular cocktail of drugs that were given over time used belladonna, which is also known as deadly nightshade, henbane, which contains chemicals like hyoscine, which is also known by scopolamine, which we've talked about, and also hyoscyamine, which is also in henbane and mandrake. All these chemicals, by the way, if you've noticed and heard of them before, these natural herbs, belladonna, nightshade, henbane, have all been used by witches for untold periods of time, for potions. Even in Shakespeare and things like that, you can hear some of these chemicals used. Folk medicine has used them, and I believe it's all the way back from the fallen angels who were taught that these particular root drugs. But this was given in a modern medical hospital facility to cure addictions like alcoholism. And one of the curiosities of this was that henbane, one of the drugs there, is known when you take it, ingest it, for causing sensations of flight, where you actually feel like you're flying. And there are some theories that this is how the rumors got in the myths about witches actually flying in broomsticks and things like that, was because they would take in their covens, they would take this henbane, and they would actually take it in mass and think that they were flying. Okay. So, this belladonna treatment, all of a sudden this man initiates somebody, money becomes available to put this hospital together. One of the early people who comes up to attempt this treatment is a gentleman by the name of Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson is a drunk at the time, but he will become the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. He, just before this period of time, got to know some people called the Oxford movement, which was a Christian movement but has some very, very dark background to it as well, too. And that had a lot of effects on his work as well, too. But that's for a whole other story, talking about the Oxford movement. But he goes to this hospital for this very bizarre treatment of given these ancient drugs. And during his hospital treatment, he says he had a mystical experience with God. And this was the experience that he talked about for the rest of his life. He said he had a sensation of flight, which is obviously from the henbane, and this experience of being set on a mountaintop, and his exclamation was, if this is the God of the preachers, then I accept it. or something to that effect. So he associated that with what he referred to as God or higher power to later state to what he experienced. Now, he had a very interesting life that many people don't know about. He said that he actually channeled the 12 steps that he wrote about in his book from a 15th century monk, from the resources I have, and this is because he maintained an interest in spiritualism the rest of his life. But he says this came from this other intelligence that provided this information. And in fact, his biographer said that he had something in his house called the spooky room at his home, where they would go do seances or Ouija board activity, and so they were definitely into that. He also got really involved in the consumption of LSD, and he was part of a study group back in the 50s and I guess 60s, studying its use for assistance. People who assisted him were Aldous Huxley, a gentleman who has also a very sordid past from Brave New World and his plan to actually keep most of the world's population drugged on soma. It's talked about in his writing, his globalist writings that he had of an elite running over a drug populace. People like Gerald Hurd, who I've since learned was one of the earliest prominent New Age teachers in America in consciousness expansion. Even Claire Booth Lucci, who was a congressional figure, female congressional figure, whose husband operated the Time magazine. So a very interesting group. But he mentioned in this consumption of LSD that the experience he had was basically identical to his religious experience he had in that hospital, which is what he considered his contact with God.
For the next few minutes, I want to talk to the author of one of the individual booklets, John Lanigan, about Alcoholics Anonymous, and he says in his booklet, quote, "The spiritual truth behind Alcoholics Anonymous and why Christians should think twice about joining AA." He writes, "Christians in AA may not see it this way, but in their participation of Alcoholics Anonymous, they are standing in agreement with a belief system that lifts up strange gods. In Alcoholic Anonymous, all gods are considered equal and are called the higher power, thus relegating Jesus Christ, our King, to commonality as if he were simply one nameless deity among many." John Lanigan, welcome for the first time to the microphones of Understanding the Times Radio.
Thank you, Jan.
Okay, you've been a member, or you were a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for a lot of years, correct?
Right, on and off for a lot of years. I first came in as an unbeliever, and I was kind of surprised because it was clearly a religion, but you would really face a lot of pressure if you said that. It was always called a spiritual program. Now, however, many years later, well, in 1999, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruling that AA is indeed religious in nature. And it's essentially a devotional service when you go to these meetings. The higher power receives praise and worship. Confession is heard, testimonies given. The group invokes the Serenity Prayer and the Lord's Prayer. And the 12th step instructs AA members to go forth and spread the word. And whether one calls it spiritual or religious, Jan, the bottom line is that millions have been taught to reach outside or inside of themselves to draw on a higher power and give them strength. And I am saying as a Christian to my Christian brothers and sisters that it's time we took a look at this and compare the AA theology to what we find in the Bible. Okay. And we will find that we're not supposed to be there at all.
Let me just refer to your booklet for a minute. And the booklet is titled "The Spiritual Truth Behind Alcoholics Anonymous and Why Christians Should Think Twice About Joining AA." And it's a 20-some page book, again, in keeping with the booklets that many of you have already ordered from us. I'm going to say more about that later, not now. But I learned in reading through the booklet, John, that the organization came about in the 1930s and gave legitimacy to talking about a generic God. In other words, no emphasis on the Lord Jesus Christ. You call it, and I love this, you call it a salad bar approach.
Yes.
Design your own God any way you want it, and you say AA's 12-step program has literally changed the spiritual direction of the country, and I know you don't mean for the good.
No, I don't mean for the good. With the introduction of this higher power concept, that is, that God can be anything that you understand he, she, or it to be, people have kind of gravitated to that because it's way easier, for someone in the flesh to kind of make up their own religion and spirituality. And some of these people do get sober. I mean, I certainly do not want to deny that. And I also don't want to offend anybody, but I guess I'm going to, Jan. And what we have with this higher power spreading throughout the United States and all around the world is a separate religion that is growing stronger day by day. It's funny, but while Christians who are in AA will resist thinking about this or oppose it, the emergent people like Phyllis Tickle, they know what the higher power in AA has done. They know that it's weakened Christianity.
Well, that's amazing because they don't have much discernment for anything, and yet they seem to get this.